Hi, everyone, and welcome to the AgriSolar Clearinghouse webinar series. This is our first webinar, and you can sign up for other webinars on our events calendar, and you can sign up for our newsletter on our homepage. If you need any help, just email us at agrisolar@ncat.org. Today, we're going to be hearing from our partners at NREL, at the National Renewable Energy Lab, and they're going to be talking about the great work that they're doing in their Inspire project and all of the data and resources they have available. I'm going to introduce Jordan Macknick first, and then he'll introduce his team. We've got a great turnout today, so we've muted everyone. Please drop your questions into the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can by the end of the hour. Jordan Macknick is the lead energy water land analyst for NREL. He is the distinguished member of the NREL research staff. Over the past 13 years at NREL, his work has addressed the environmental impacts of energy technologies while seeking opportunities for energy, economic, and ecological synergies. He's the principal investigator of the Inspire project, which is the nation's largest and most comprehensive agrivoltaics research project with more than 25 agrivoltaic sites across the country. Jordan, welcome.
Thanks so much, Stacy. It's really great to be here. And our team is very excited to share with you some of the latest and greatest research we've been doing on agrivoltaics. I will be joined today by James McCall from NREL, as well as Haley Paterson from NREL, two key contributors on our Inspire work. But there's a lot of other people that are really behind a lot of the work that you'll see. And once I share my screen and get into the slides, you'll see some of the names, and we'll call out some of those folks. Should I dive into it, Stacy? Are we ready?
Yeah, I think that's great. And just for all the participants, we are recording this and we'll be posting it to the AgriSolar Clearinghouse soon.
All right. So thanks again, everybody. This is a really exciting opportunity for us to give you again a little bit of a sneak peek of some of the work that's been going on, and I'm also really excited for the opportunity to let James and Haley talk about a lot of the great research we're doing. But as I mentioned, we have a whole army of a team members that are behind this work that you're seeing. Everyone's sort of working, whether it's collecting data, organizing data, putting data on our website. It's really been a very much a team effort, and so we're very happy to come with you as a team. And although there are 3 people talking today, again, there's about a dozen people that have really contributed to this work. So when Stacy and I were talking about the theme of this webinar, crunching numbers. Everyone is really interested in the numbers associated with agrivoltaics. Everyone really wants to know how many how many sites are there, or what's the cost, all these other sorts of numbers. And we've been sitting on a lot of this data, and so I think it's good an opportunity to do it, to share with you now. But the first thing I really thought of when I talked about crunching numbers was it really brought me back to grade school, and there's only going to be a certain number of people, children of the 80s and 90s, who remember this hero, the number muncher. And I feel like because we're talking about agrivoltaics, we're talking about food, things you eat. Maybe we should have called this munching numbers in agrivoltaics. But anyway, this is the first thing I thought of. But I will say we do have a delicious menu of things that we're going to talk about and go through today. I'll give a brief overview of the Inspire project and try to get it through that as quickly as possible, so we can leave more time for talking about some of the other great work that we're doing. Haley Paterson will be talking about our agrivoltaics map, so looking at how many different agrivoltaic sites are there in the country right now. James McCall will be talking about some of our recent research on O&M costs for agrivoltaic projects, as well as then combining those O&M costs with capital costs, with energy trade-offs and agriculture trade-offs on your farm with our financial calculator. And then I'll close things out with a little bit of talking about the state of agrivoltaics research now in our data portal, which is characterizing and really cataloging all the different research and other numbers that are available in the research community associated with agrivoltaics. And so I think it's going to be a really exciting webinar, and we're very happy to be with all of you today. So little bit of background about the Inspire project. So we've been funded by the Department of Energy since 2015 to look at agrivoltaics. And we've done that over the course of the last 7 years or so at a number of different field sites that have been looking at grazing or crop production or ecosystem services and pollinator habitat. And that work has been complemented by some analytical and economic type research. And it's really meant to be a community of academics, of industry, and of state agencies really partnering and working together to address a lot of this research. And we do that by really having this broad geographic scope, covering a lot of different configurations and covering a lot of different topics. Our thoughts are that solar and agriculture can have mutual benefits. And the charge of what we're looking at is to try to quantify where can there be mutual benefits, where might there be negative or different types of trade-offs, and trying to quantify those and really provide greater insights into landowners or farmers or solar developers or state agencies as they make their decisions about solar permitting and siting, or about the other land use decisions that are really much broader in scope as well. And I want to be clear, when we talk about agrivoltaics, we have a big umbrella, and we include crop production underneath and around panels. We include grazing underneath and around panels. We also include ecosystem services, including pollinator habitat that are co-located with the systems, as well as solar greenhouse technologies. And in our research in the field, as well as analytically, we consider agrivoltaic systems that are with traditional utility scale solar designs and configurations, where you might just grow crops in between rows or have flowers and other native plants in between rows. But we also consider alternative configurations where we might have elevated panels or spaced out panels or novel designs like vertical bifacial systems or greenhouses. All these things are sort of under that umbrella of agrivoltaics, and they all have potential applications and are suitable for different types of activities in different regions. And we, again, are trying to quantify and clarify where these might be the most appropriate. Our Inspire field work, again, is sort of spread out all across the United States, with looking at different types of systems, whether they are ecosystem services sites or crop production sites or combinations of those. And some of those can use traditional PV designs, whereas others can use some of these more alternative configurations. But again, we try to get a nice collection of different configurations, different applications throughout the country. But although we do talk about our field work a lot, and we do show a lot of pictures from our field work, we are doing just as much work on the other side of the equation, analytical research, a lot of desktop research, modeling, et cetera. And that's going to be the subject of some of the things you'll hear in the webinar today. So some of the things we're doing are tracking and mapping agrivoltaic projects across the country, standardizing agrivoltaic research protocols to conduct the research, developing a research roadmap, helping to guide the industry going forward, considering the economic trade-offs of different types of agrivoltaic systems, hosting a data portal of different agrivoltaic resources that people can use, hosting an advisory group called the Astro Network, which really combines people from all different sectors together to talk about their most pressing needs within agrivoltaics, and then lastly, hosting research workshops and conferences. So there's a lot we're doing on the other end that's not just growing tomatoes or raising sheep. Today we can't talk about all these things. We could go on for hours, but today we're really going to keep it focused on three primary areas. One is tracking and mapping agrivoltaic projects throughout the country. The second is looking at economic trade-offs of agrivoltaic systems, both from the O&M perspective, as well as from that entire system of combining O&M with capital costs with farm revenue. And lastly, our data portal of different agrivoltaic resources, where you can go to find a lot more information yourself. And so with that, I would like to now pass it on to Haley Paterson, who's been with NREL coming close to a year now, and has really been the architect working with Hannah Fields in designing this agrivoltaics map, and it's been the one really doing the lion's share of the work in identifying and collecting and cleaning a lot of the data that you'll see on the map that she's going to show. So, Haley?
Okay, everybody can hear me all right?
Mhm.
Okay, I can just see you, Jordan, but if you can hear me, then everybody else can.
Good.
All right, so as Jordan said, my name is Haley Paterson. I will have been with NREL coming up here in April for a year, hoping to stay for a long time. So to continue this great work that we're doing. So today I'm going to tell you guys about the Agrivoltaics map. Next slide, please. All right, so here we have a little screen grab, and this is our National Agrivoltaics map. This is the link here on the slide, and it should be in the chat now if you guys want to click through and check this out for yourself. It is live and open to the public. So this is our national database of agrivoltaic projects in the US. It is interactive, it has filtering and sorting capabilities. It is up to date as of today with all the information that we have been given. And it includes those 4 categories of crop productions that Jordan mentioned earlier. All right, next slide, please. A little bit of background and motivation. Why do we need an agrivoltaics map? So I think we all know that solar is expanding, and agrivoltaics is emerging as a solution to land use concerns with solar. But there's not a clear understanding of how many agrivoltaic sites there are, where they are, how big they are, what they look like. And we concluded that the best way to address this question was to develop a detailed map of agrivoltaic projects in the US. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to go through this real quick. I know it's a lot of text. Basically, this is just how we went about getting our map together. We created a template that allowed people, allowed a standard for people to enter information about their sites. And then we reached out to different partners with this template and asked them for all the information they were willing to give us about all the sites that they knew about. We had to clean this data up a little bit. Everybody's answers looked a little bit different. Some pieces needed to be filled in so that it could be formatted correctly for entry into our map. And then we uploaded it all into the map. Next slide, please. So now I'll walk you through the summary of our data as we have it today. So on the map today, we have 314 sites. Just for the record, we know there are more out there than this. We know that there are a lot of sheep grazing sites that we're not tracking, and I'm sure there are sites that we don't even know about. So later I'll tell you guys how you can tell us about sites that you know about. But as of today, we are tracking just over 2,800 megawatts DC total on our map, and a little bit over 17,000 acres and all these activities. So as you can see, most of these today are ecosystem service sites in the graph on the right. The other sites make up quite a bit less. But like I said, we think there are more out there and we want to know about them. So most of these sites also fall into the mid-range categories for megawatts and acres, between 5 and 25 acres and between 1 and 5 megawatts. So this is the largest repository of agrivoltaic sites that we know about. So taking this information, we can further break it down and see what agrivoltaics looks like based on our map. So, all right, Jordan's on top of the slides. All right, so this is a breakdown of how big the agrivoltaic sites are, and this is just nationally. So we have on the left megawatts and on the right acres. So you can see, and we also have averages down in the bottom corner. Ecosystem service sites are smaller on average than grazing sites. They're about a 1/16 of the size based on megawatts and acreage. On average, they're 4 megawatts per site and about 25 acres, where grazing tends to be 63 megawatts and 410 acres. So a pretty big difference. But ecosystem service still makes up such a large portion of what you're seeing here because there's so many ecosystem service sites. So yeah, and then all the others, like I said, they're a little smaller, their averages are a little lower, but they're just as important. So now that we've seen, how many of these sites they are and kind of how big they are, we can start to break down where they're located. So this is a basic heat map of what we have on our website. As you can see, Minnesota by far has the lion's share of all of these sites. They have more than 3 times as many sites as the next highest state. They have 144, where Illinois and Wisconsin follow with 35 and 38 sites. Most of the states that we're tracking have 10 sites or less. And And what I think this heat map does a good job of is showing what states we don't have information for. And I think this is a really good opportunity for people to say, well, hey, I know about a site that's in Missouri. And like I said, we would love to know about it. So if you know about sites in any of these states, the more states we add to this site and our map, the better our map will be. So this told us how big the sites are and where they are, but what type are they? And so we broke this down by state. Just to get a little bit closer look at all this. So a little fun fact, California and Colorado have the only agrivoltaic greenhouses on the map. But for the most part, states have ecosystem services. Not a surprise based on the previous graphs that we looked at. Right now, ecosystem services is the bulk of the agrivoltaics that we have. So grazing is the next most common. As you can see, New York has good grazing. Colorado, California, and Texas all have decent grazing, a decent number of grazing sites rather. But what's really interesting is when you start to break the size down of these sites by state. So next slide, please. Thank you. So what's really interesting to me about this is we saw that Minnesota by far has the most sites out of any other state just by number, but they don't have the most megawatts or the most acres by state. That would be Texas. Everything's bigger in Texas. So even though they have a fewer number of sites, they're just monstrous. Texas has 2 sites that are over 950 acres, and they're both over 150 megawatts DC. And then following up with that is California. They have 1 site that's 4,700 acres with 660 megawatts DC. So that kind of breaks down for us nicely how the number of sites doesn't totally do justice to how big the solar footprint is in these states and the agrivoltaic footprint. Number and placement of sites alone won't convey what this slide shows us already, which is part of how we came to the conclusion of what information we wanted for our map for it to be a holistic picture of what agrivoltaics looks like. So now that you've seen all the numbers and all the graphs, it's time to actually take a look at the map. And I'm going to apologize in advance. We had a huge blizzard here in Colorado that prevented us from going into the office today. So we're going to do this in screen grabs through the slides. I think it should do it pretty good justice. And like I said, the link should be in the chat. So if you want to follow along with us and kind of test out how this works for yourself, feel free. So here it is. This is the main page of the Agrivoltaics website. It's just a regular Google base map, and we have agrivoltaic specific icons. You can see them over in the filter legend and also on the map. Bees for ecosystem service, a tomato for crop production, sheep for grazing, and there's a little greenhouse icon that you can see hiding in there. And then we also have, you might see some of these circles. Those are indications of sites that have multiple agrivoltaic activities going on, and you can tell what activities they have based on what the 2 little icons are in the circle. So next slide, please. As you can see, the filters are active, and you can select for crop production and grazing, for example, and it will show all the sites that are part of those. And it will also show any sites that have one of those as part of 2 of a multiple site. So some of these filters we don't have, they weren't required information from our partners. Agrivoltaic activity, system size are both ones that all of these sites have information for. So if you filter by those, it will be comprehensive and be, our graphs are based on that information basically. All right, so you can also zoom in on a specific state, and I picked Colorado because that's what I know. So you can get a little bit closer. All of these have latitude and longitude locations, so you can see where they're at. You can see, breakdown by state. And then if you click on one of the icons, we have a little pop-up window that shows up for you. It gives you a little bit more information than just what you can parse from the filters. And then also, if you click on that highlighted blue title at the top, it will take you to the individual page for a site. And this is all of the information that we have about a site. Anything that doesn't show up on the map because we didn't have space or, for whatever reason, it's going to show up here. All of our information is on these individual sites. You still have this little map inset, so you know where you're looking in case you forgot. And basically, yeah, so you can look at the kind of crops, where the crops are at, if they irrigate, all these things that just weren't practical to host on the main map. So if we go back to the map, you might have noticed down here at the bottom, this little bank of titles. So if you scroll down, we have a table. And the table basically just has listed out all of that information that's in the map that you can visually read. So on the left, you see the names are in blue. That will also take you to that individual site that we just showed. So there are a couple different ways to get there. And if you use, if you filter on the map, it will also filter this table. So if you select for only crop production sites and then scroll down to the table, you will only see crop production sites. So that's kind of a handy tool if you want to look at specifics about the sites, basically. And so last but definitely not least, if you scroll back up to the map, we have a contribute to the Agrivoltaics map button. So if you click on that, it will take you to the contribute page. So we have 3 ways to contribute. There's the contribute to our map now, which is just a form on this website that you fill out and it will put your site on the map. There's submit map data for review, which is a little bit more user-friendly survey that you can fill out and take your time. Both of those are more for a small number of sites. If you have a large number of sites that you know about that you want to share, you probably want to email Jordan or you can email me. I've included my email here because yeah, the other 2 are more for filling things in now that we have the bulk of sites. If it's a large number of sites, we have to go through it a little bit differently. So, and if you have questions about any of this stuff, how to contribute, how the map works, you can go to the last slide, I guess. You notice any mistakes or anything like that, let us know. We want this to be as accurate as possible. You know, we have 300 sites across 30 states, and that is a great start. But we know that there are more sites out there, and we just want this to be as complete as possible so that people understand what agrivoltaics looks like. So I've included the map link again here in the slide. It should be in the chat. And then I've also included that contribute link so that if you know about sites, you can just go straight to the contribute and let us know about sites that you know about. So with that, I'm all finished. And now James should talk to you guys about the operation and maintenance considerations of these kind of sites.
Thank you, Haley. Yeah, so we're gonna change gears just a little bit and kind of go into that was focused on tracking, and now this is kind of some of our efforts to model both the operations and maintenance costs and also the overall total project costs in our financial calculator. So Jordan, if you want to go to the next slide. So on this first piece, we had undergone some effort back in 2019 to try to quantify the different operations and maintenance cost impacts for different types of ground cover types. So gravel, turf grass, native / pollinator habitat, and grazing were kind of the main areas that we kind of focused on for different operations and maintenance costs. And really, we were trying to establish the ranges for these different practices to assist in cost modeling, knowing that every site is going to be slightly different, and there's going to be a lot of factors that, both, rain and precipitation, climate, so on and so forth, that are actually going to impact these overall costs. But it really was trying to kind of see what were these cost drivers and kind of could we also then get some kind of industry perspective on these different types of ground covers and their operations and maintenance implications. So next slide. So as I mentioned, we did some surveys, company outreach, and also reviewed some invoices from June of 2019 to April of 2020, and tried to kind of quantify those based on different companies that we surveyed. So some were PV developers or operators, some were service providers, and then others were vegetation management contractors. And so where possible, we tried to collect costs by different activities, both on the dollar per kilowatt per year or dollar per acre per year for mowing, herbicide application, weeding, tree trimming, grazing, fencing, and then site monitoring and vegetation management. So as you notice, it's focused much more on trying to quantify the vegetation management and kind of the establishment of different habitats versus actual kind of PV system operations and maintenance costs. So if you want to go to the next slide, Jordan. So just wanted to kind of pop this up really quickly. This is a lot of different, a lot of kind of data. But just we tracked the region, site size, the panel type, the panel height, were there any differences in like the row distances in between panels, and then also the kind of different practices. So most of our sites were in the Midwest, or at least that we got data for. There was a fairly large range on the site size. Panel type was kind of right in between on fixed versus tracking. And then the other one was, most of our data collected had to do with native vegetation and pollinator habitat that was actually established there. So if you want to go to the next slide, this is going to show just the overall range of the data that we collected. So on the left, it's actually a cost per kilowatt DC installed per year for the different activity costs by practice for the different ground cover types. And as you can kind of see that there's a lot of variation amongst a lot of the different ground cover types, and particularly when it comes to mowing activities, as you notice in the green on the very left of that chart, there's a very wide range of kind of mowing events and mowing costs. And that was based a lot upon kind of different regions. The other thing that you notice is that some of these activities have a lot of different events, such as kind of, for sheep grazing, we kind of saw, mowing, herbicide, trimming, grazing, fencing, and site monitoring. But then when you go over to the right, in the total cost by practice, most of these costs are fairly similar in terms of the mean average cost per acre. So there are some kind of variations by sites, but overall, the cost is kind of fairly comparable or kind of within that statistical significance area for the data that we collected. But there is also still kind of variation and outliers even amongst these kind of different kind of areas, just showing that based on both our small sample size and also kind of the, just the difficulty in modeling all these costs, that, you're going to have kind of these variations across the site. Want to go to the next slide? And then you can kind of just start clicking through these as I talk about them. So, overall, the average total O&M cost is comparable. Even though this cost is comparable, different ground covers kind of involve different types and also frequency of like activities. One of the main things that we noticed was that, in mowing costs, some developers noticed $30 to $200 per acre for mowing costs across regions, and particularly in regions with a lot of rainfall, and where it's actually difficult to actually prevent weeds, there's a lot more mowing events. Next. In terms of actual specific site characteristics, the panel height didn't seem to have a big impact on the O&M costs, or at least at the sites that we mentioned, but fixed panels led to more expensive trimming and mowing costs than tracking panels. And this is because you could actually take advantage of mowing on the side that is kind of tilted in the morning, or I believe that would be the west side of the row versus the east side. And so you actually can kind of work around the solar panels on kind of like what area you're actually mowing, versus on the fixed panels, you kind of have to hop in there by hand and kind of, kind of do some mowing events. The vegetation establishment had an impact on the timing of costs and O&M events. So in particularly, there's more O&M costs up front to establish this, but we are starting to see some reduction in 3 to 5 years based on like decrease in mowing events and so on and so forth. Next bullet. And then also just kind of like establishing kind of different seeding kind of rates and so on and so forth. Weed control and mowing are the main early operations and maintenance costs, and particularly after the site is just installed, this like vegetation management is a much larger piece than kind of the actual PB O&M. And so that's for the first couple of years, that's kind of the dominant driver of costs. We also saw that kind of numerous respondents, and this is much more on the qualitative side, mentioned continual seeding before, during, and after. That actually reduced seeding and also herbicide costs through kind of weed management. So kind of incorporating this into development practices and kind of seeding, throughout actually led to some cost benefits. Next bullet. And then for grazing, the water hauling, fencing management, herd management costs were the cost drivers. But there is also that benefit back to both the grazer and also to the solar developer, because there's kind of a reduced cost. And the grazing plan the intensive and recharge versus rotational grazing can actually impact costs, and that basically ties to the longer that we have, the longer that sheep are on the site, the more and more you have to kind of pay someone to go out and manage the sheep, versus just kind of moving them on and off the site can kind of reduce costs, but can kind of change some of the grazing and vegetation management practices or patterns. So that's kind of just some like overall key takeaways that we're finding from the operations maintenance. We hope to have this paper published soon, so we can actually share this data, as we've kind of, as Jordan mentioned, we've been sitting on it for a while. So this should be public, hopefully at the middle part of this year, if not sooner. So next, I want to kind of just, sorry, this is a little jarring to go right into the Agrivoltaics financial calculator, but the operations and maintenance costs that we just had are actually a direct input into this. So if you want to go to the next slide. So we developed this online calculator, and if we want to, yeah, thank you so much, Anna, for tossing that link in chat. So there's basically been a growing interest in agrivoltaics from both like landowners, farmers, the solar industry, and others. And these configurations and kind of different practices can really vary drastically, as can kind of the cost, impacts on energy generation, and also the compatibility with actual farming practices. And there was really no consistent publicly available tool that could actually provide these, kind of like at least a first pass estimate on the impacts of energy generations and costs. We had a lot of energy models that we could use, but you really needed to be kind of an expert in the tool to kind of make it do what you needed to do. And so that's kind of why we ended up developing this financial calculator. And then we're trying to kind of incorporate some other aspects, as kind of data becomes available, such as this, other bullet of crop modeling is still maturing, but basically once these kind of costs kind of start to get incorporated, we think that this framework can then just kind of be updated as we're getting better and better data. And that's really through this prior success of, NREL's SAM or System Advisor model. So if you go to sam.nrel.gov, that actually kind of pops up with all that information. So I just like to show this, just like, so here's all the steps. I'm not going to go through each one of these to kind of model, kind of the energy generation and also economic benefits of solar projects. So if you want to click again. And so really agrivoltaics configurations really has an impact on a fairly large portion of this like energy kind of modeling step. Just showing that like these different configurations can actually have a fairly large impact on the kind of results at the end. And so also coupled with this, we have some capital cost data that is actually available at the link at the bottom. And this kind of takes a lot of different layouts of solar sites or solar configurations and also agrivoltaic practices and tries to kind of quantify a cost. And so all of our capital and operations and maintenance costs come directly from these kind of cost modeling. So I just wanted to make sure that we highlighted that these are based on kind of real world observations to a certain extent, and then also kind of based in these kind of data sets. So next slide. And so for our financial calculator, Jordan presented the picture on the left earlier. We can really model just about every kind of agrivoltaic scenario except for greenhouse solar right now. So we can model, growing crops, we can model grazing, we can model kind of the ecosystem services, or much more about kind of growing vegetation and specifically pollinator habitats kind of underneath that. Also coupled with a lot of different alternative configurations to incorporate different crops or cattle in certain circumstances. And then this is also coupled with the impacts of what different solar configuration options are. So can you spread out the rows to allow more light or kind of tractors to go through? Can you raise the panels to allow crops underneath the array? Can you actually space out the panels in an area that doesn't get a lot of sunlight to allow kind of sunlight to get through the crops? So all of those different kind of parameters can be kind of modeled at this first order estimate in our tool. So if you want to go to the next slide. So basically all of the inputs into this are, you enter the address of your site, you pick your agrivoltaic activity, You pick kind of what you want to do with your solar configuration on kind of how to incorporate that agrivoltaic activity. And if there's, something that doesn't really seem to work with that solar kind of configuration, the model's going to let you know. Pick your panel type, the amount of acreage. Do you want solar tracking? Tracker to kind of, it's more installed upfront costs, but it allows for more generation on the same plot of land. You can kind of assign an agricultural value for if you're still going to grow crops underneath there. And then also if there's an agrivoltaics policy incentive. So actually what I'm presenting right now is some runs that I actually did on our financial calculator to show kind of the difference in these different scenarios. And so this is like, so say like I'm a small potato farmer in LaSalle, Colorado, and kind of here's some kind of different impacts. So on this kind of results table, just to kind of show this is a model run with traditional kind of PV, so very kind of low to the ground panels, and then kind of crops in between. So kind of a fairly large reduction in kind of farmable area underneath the panels. And so we can calculate the farm revenue, the solar revenue, the total revenue of this scenario, and then kind of these different kind of capital costs to install. And then kind of some of these energy and kind of also other financial parameters. And so again, I think that the value of this tool is to get an idea of like what is the order of magnitude of this kind of impact. And really you would need to do much more detailed specific system modeling to kind of get an actual number. But if you go to the next slide, what this tool really allows is kind of this comparison of different parameters across these different kind of scenarios. So in this one, this is for the same thing that had been modeled before, but then I ended up picking different system configurations and taking a look at what this impact has on this. So, for ag only, we don't have any solar. And then for the kind of the traditional kind of PV and elevated panels, there's not a large impact on energy generation. But if we start spacing the panels out, or we start kind of increasing the rows, or we kind of incorporate that other vertical bifacial aspect, there's now kind of an energy penalty that's like associated with that. But and I believe it's on the next slide, if you then kind of like look at that, you can actually see that your farm revenue is also kind of balanced by that. So you actually have an energy generation side, and so on and so forth. And so, but basically it's just showing you can kind of actually look at like what are the different kind of trade-offs of these different areas for your farm revenue coupled with your solar revenue. So even though you have less solar generation, you're actually allowing more farm revenue. And so that can kind of change with all those. The next slide. So the internal rate of return, and responding to a question that's actually in chat. So right now, the model just uses average electricity prices for kind of a commercial entity in Colorado, and those are actually fairly low. And so basically, like the internal negative rate of return would basically say that based on this scenario at that very cheap electricity price, this project might not make sense for just a traditional PV thing, traditional PV developer. But as you start kind of stacking these other benefits, and kind of like, and this is also balanced with the costs up front and also the revenues, based on this very kind of made up scenario, increased inter-row spacing is actually the highest rate of return that allows you to kind of still maintain your farming while still getting some energy generation. And so again, this is kind of all for just like kind of comparison purposes. Like these numbers are absolutely wrong, but I think it's that like ability to kind of model and see these different scenarios that's actually very powerful. And then also can kind of show, okay, so the as we showed earlier, the revenue of the increased inter-row spacing was actually lower, but the capex was a lot less as well. And so that's kind of that balance. That's kind of like leading to that internal rate of return. And yes, to answer Dick's question, we did include the tax credits that are associated with the extension of the ITC. If you want to go to the next slide, and this is my final slide. So kind of the next steps is where you want to get we're going to update our user interface to enable kind of different scenarios as they kind of become modeled. We really want to create these actual visualizations and comparison graphics for our results. And so kind of actually kind of coding in the charts that I created earlier. We really want to kind of keep updating this as real world cost, crop performance, the kind of electricity cost data kind of arises, and then just kind of continue continue to represent the different and wide array of systems that are kind of, coming out throughout this. So I think over time, so I'm going to pass it back to Jordan.
All right, thanks so much, James. That was a great overview of our financial calculator and its current status. And again, as Haley mentioned, we got a blizzard last night, so the whole plan was for Haley and James to actually walk through, do an interactive run through of those tools. But I think they did a great job with the screenshots and talking about some of the results. So, but I encourage you to explore that. As well as to explore the Inspire Data Portal, which I'll talk about now. And so the Inspire Data Portal was born of the idea that, as agrivoltaics is such a rapidly expanding topic, not only in deployment, but also in research. And we wanted some way to make sure we could track and make sure we have a repository where someone wanted to know about the latest and greatest research on agrivoltaics, they can find it right here. And so that's really what the data portal was designed to do. We're collecting all the various types of research and literature from all different locations and research types. And it's going to be augmented by a lot of field research data soon too. But we essentially went through a few different processes to collect data like this. We also have like the map, we also have the opportunity, if you've got a paper, of a paper that you don't see on there, you have the opportunity also to either email us or to directly contribute it to the library. But we do, we've been working on this. So Sammy Gantus, Haley Paterson, Dala Al-Mukaina have all done a lot of great work working with Hana Fields on setting up this data portal. And so as of today, we've got over 250 different agrivoltaic research papers. As you can see, most of those papers are about crop production with agrivoltaics, but we do have a fair number of papers on ecosystem services, as well as greenhouses, greenhouse systems, and grazing. And you can see on the histogram on the bottom that it's really been in the last decade or so, we've seen this huge jump in the total number of publications on agrivoltaics getting published each year. In our data portal, we not only have some summary statistics on what topic, but we can also break it down by region of focus. So this is not where where the paper was published necessarily, but where the research was about. And so some are we have actually a pretty even split among sites that are sort of general and generic, can apply anywhere, that are more global in focus, with sites that are focused on field research in Asia, field research in Europe, or field research in North America. I think there's a lot more literature that's going to be published, not only in those areas, but also coming from South America, Africa, Australia going forward. So we expect those areas to grow. But we also can say, is this paper a peer-reviewed journal article, or is it a conference paper? Was it coming from a government report, or is it a thesis, or coming from a book? So we have these other abilities to talk and track the different types of research that we have available. And I would also say that you have the ability to filter the data portal data if you're interested only in crop production, or interested only in things that are from a certain region, or only things that have specific crop yield data, or that address best practices for grazing. You can filter it and find the papers that are targeted for that particular topic as well. And so, as I mentioned, we're going to be updating this with more data sets, as new papers get published, as well as some other field research data sets as well. So I encourage you to check out that site as well. And again, that's another thing. If you notice of papers, if your paper or a paper you've been reading is not up there, let us know, or you can try to upload it yourself too. Lastly, I will close with two plugs. If you're not aware, we've had two recent publications in 2022 that I think are really useful. One is with our Astro advisory group. And so our Astro group is composed of members across government, solar industry, nonprofits, and research organizations and practitioners, really helping to contribute to make sure the Inspire research is really hard hitting and is addressing the most pressing topics. And so we have a summary report of that. We've got our website on the Astro, on the Inspire website. We've got an Astro page. Come check it out. If that's of interest to you, you're interested in learning more, please do reach out. And that email, I think, is astro@nrel.gov. And lastly, we had a pretty major publication last year summarizing the last 5 years of research with the Inspire project. It's called the 5 C's report. So here we outline what are the various factors that influence a success or not success of an agrivoltaics project based on the work that we've done, not only on our own field sites, but also engaging and interacting with industry, with farmers, other people, both domestically and globally. And so I encourage you all to check that out if you haven't seen it yet. And with that, we wanted to make sure we had enough time for questions and for discussion with the audience. And so we encourage you to check out the website, encourage you to check out the tools, and we encourage you to put more questions into the chat on what issues you're most interested in. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Jordan. That was great. I've tried to distill some of the questions for you so we can get to as many as possible. Could you first talk about how you guys define ecosystem services, and then talk a little bit about the type of crops that can be grown? We will have a whole webinar on crops in a couple of weeks with Greg Barron-Gafford, but I know you can speak really well to that too.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll talk the crops question first, and then James leads a lot of our ecosystem services work. So that's a fun question to try to answer. So I'll let James take on that one. But in terms of crops, what are the crops that you can grow in an agrivoltaics context? I think the answer really is, our hypothesis is anything you can grow in the open air environment, you can likely grow in an agrivoltaics context if you have the right configuration and if you're in the right location. And so what this might mean, though, is that, as we show diagrams, agrivoltaics can include your traditional utility scale setup. It can include elevated panels or spaced out panels. All of those allow for different amounts of sunlight, can change the microclimate, the shading that's going to fall on the ground. And so that means, so for certain crops that, might be less tolerant to shade, if you think about certain things like corn, for example, there you can grow it, but, you need to think about higher panels or panels that are much spread apart, so you have less shading. And so I think that's really, the key question that, that was asked is, I have a farm in Iowa, or I have a farm in Florida, or I have a farm in Oregon. What can I grow there? And it's really, that's sort of the holy grail that we're getting there. We're trying to understand. As we mentioned, a lot of the crop modeling tools that are out there are still maturing. We're still learning a lot more about how plants respond best, how plants respond to different levels of shade under the solar panel, to help us better understand in which locations, which configurations lead to the best performance for different sorts of crops. So I think that's, basically, if you want to grow something on your farm that you're already growing, we can talk about what configuration might be most compatible with that, given the sunlight needs, given the farm equipment you might be needing to do that. All right, now the easy question on to James.
Yeah, probably the most contentious question of a lot of this research. Yeah, I think ecosystem services tends up being kind of a catch-all term for a lot of different kind of sites. And that's really just because there is not really a regulatory definition of that. But I think in this project, we're kind of being like lenient on what kind of qualifies as like ecosystem services, just because we haven't really been good at kind of quantifying a lot, or there hasn't been a lot of work quantifying that. So I think in this bucket, turf grass and clover kind of counts, pollinator habitats, any low impact site development that kind of maintains native vegetation, anything that's kind of like preventing stormwater runoff and kind of increasing water quality outcomes, carbon sequestration on sites. And so I think it's a bit of a catch-all term, but I would think for reference to our map, it mainly has to deal with pollinator habitat and kind of native vegetation, with some turf grass and clover sites kind of like going in there. And I know any ecologist would probably be fairly upset at me calling turf grass and clover pollinator habitat, but that's, it still is kind of creating a habitat, and there is some benefits. And so I think that's kind of a lot of what our work is doing, is trying to kind of set these kind of set the definitions. I know our counterparts in Europe hate the fact that we call ecosystem services as like agrivoltaics. And so it's all trying to kind of come up with this definition set that we can use to kind of communicate, and making sure that all of these kind of different kind of perspectives are kind of included in that. So Hope I answered that. It was a little bit of a cop out, but it's also because I don't think there's a great direct answer.
Great.
Yeah, and to
thanks.
clarify, there's a question in there. Turf grass alone does not count. It would have to be turf grass paired with another flowering species.
Great, thanks.
But it would be a mix.
Looks like there's a question in there a couple times about, are you tracking if there is an installed wireless smart sensor network?
Are we tracking for each of the individual projects? No.
Okay.
That would be great, though. It would be great to know, but I think that, yeah, that's information that's not publicly available. And so we try to really focus on information that's just publicly available.
Okay, it looks like he's asking the whole question. Let me scroll back up to his question. Do you track which projects have installed wireless smart sensor networks on the agrivoltaic equipment for continuous performance monitoring and on the crops to track performance metrics? It's up in the Zoom if you, or up in the chat if you want to scroll up.
I think the short answer is no.
Okay.
A lot of the agrivoltaic monitoring that we have is going to be done at our research sites. And that is, it's, yeah, so I think the short answer is probably no.
Okay, great. Someone else asked a while back, are there any projects that are like a cogeneration for heat generation?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay,
No.
I mean, maybe in greenhouses, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and we haven't tracked any CSP or anything else on that front. So just because it's not being developed as much in the United States currently.
Great. And then someone asked the formulas for the calculations, will those be provided within the report?
Yeah, so and I forgot to mention this, on the financial calculator itself, there should be like a button of like base assumptions, and that's going to have kind of all of the inputs, the sources, the information. It's not going to be every single equation, because a lot of this actually builds off the system advisor model kind of API. So it kind of basically, but if you look through that documentation, which it's like a 90-page document, you will eventually find all those kind of equations, but at least the ones relevant to the differences in the financial calculator, those will definitely be in there.
Great, thanks. Someone else asked if you have, let's see, if you're able to look at that map and see who the developer is or who the owner operator is on your agrivoltaics map.
So Haley could comment on this as well. So that was not a required field. So some developers and owners and operators chose to identify themselves, but not all of them did. But especially some of the names, some of that information is publicly available. And again, we try to focus just on the publicly available information. I don't know, Haley, if you have any information on the percentages of the sites that do have listed owners and operators or developers.
No, I don't. But if you remember when I showed everybody to go to the individual page for different sites, if we have owner or installer information, it should be on that site. If it's, if they were okay with us putting it on there, that's where you would find that information.
Great, thank you. Let's see. So did someone else asked if you considered mowing damage and the potential there within the cost calculations, maybe chips to the panels, things like that?
Yeah, that was not included in that kind of cost data, or at least on specific cost data. I mean, it was noted that in our kind of qualitative data collection, we've also heard that kind of getting different kind of mower technologies is kind of really reduced down that versus the kind of side mower, the back mower, like more like a flail mower can kind of reduce some of that. So there is some kind of at least changes to kind of how vegetation management contractors are actually evolving to kind of address that kind of concern, but we did not capture the actual cost just because it's so variable by year and site.
Great. Well, as we wrap up, did you guys want to talk about future trends, things that you see upcoming in agrivoltaics?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you know, one of the driving questions, you know, that we see is how large can we go on these? So, you know, as you can see on the map, you know, most of our for, you know, crop production sites and agrivoltaics are relatively small. So we've got, you know, I think the largest one is in Maine right now with growing blueberries. We've got some other large ones in Massachusetts with Knowlton Farms, and then we've got Jack Solar Garden in Colorado. I think there's a lot of interest in seeing how can we, if we are interested in doing crop production on a much larger scale, what are the right configurations? Is it just growing in between rows of traditional utility scale panels? Can we do some unique designs or elevated panels or other spacing between rows that doesn't lead to a very large impact on capital cost investments? So I think innovations and really looking at different approaches to scaling up agrivoltaics is one major emerging trend that we'll see, because, you know, as we've seen, there's a lot of, and as Haley showed, there's a lot of large projects associated with grazing and ecosystem services already. And so that's where the crop production could use a little bit more insight. I think there's also a lot of interest in doing agrivoltaics with cattle. And I think there's a few different technologies that have been proposed, a few different approaches that could work, but we've got a lot more land devoted and a lot more head of cattle than we do sheep. And so sheep have proven to be, you know, a solar project's best friends in some ways. But there's interest in seeing what lessons can be learned for translating that to cattle, who are taller and stronger and have different needs than sheep. And so I think that's another area we'll see some growth and exploration. I think also there's ample room for innovations on alternative PV technology. So this could be organic PV or semi-transparent or translucent PV technologies, potentially with tunable wavelengths, and that can be applied in not only outdoor systems but also in indoor greenhouse systems as well. And so I think those are three, you know, major areas where we might see a lot of advancements and a lot of interesting new designs and people exploring new topics.
That's great. I see a few more things coming through the chat down there. I saw a nod to the Solar Farm Summit. That will be a great event for all of you going. Some folks asked where they can read more about your research. Is your website the best place for that?
Yeah, our website would be the best spot to go to learn about our ongoing field research sites, our past publications. We've got a primer on agrivoltaics. Then we also have those other resources, as I mentioned, the financial calculator, the tracking map, the data portal, all that's housed right there.
Great. Well, thanks so much. I think we'll stop it here, and we will post this to the AgriSolar Clearinghouse. Any questions, agrisolar@ncat.org, or me directly at stacyb@ncat.org. Thanks very much, everybody.